Hello, this is a video to show you how to use the PHP explode function. I erroneously said array split, but that was actually incorrect. So I apologize for giving you the wrong pointer here. The function that you need to look up is called explode. So if you look up explode in PHP, I think the first link will get you there. All right, so there we have the explode function explained in PHP. And I find that sometimes PHP.NET does not give you the best explanation. In this case, it says it returns an array of strings, each of which is a substring of string formed by splitting it on boundaries formed by the string character delimiter. So delimiter is going to be a string that tells the function explode what is separating the parts in a string. String itself is going to be a string that has multiple components separated by whatever the delimiter is specifying. We are not too concerned about the limit because in this case, limit is to specify an array that contains up to that many items. And because we're only dealing with a small number of items, that is not going to be an issue. All right, so let's go ahead and write a simple test script to try out. And this is one way that I learn in terms of programming is I will read about the documentation and then I'll write a small program to test out and see how it works. So we'll go, okay, let's write our first explode script here and open the PHP code section, close it, and then in between, we'll go ahead and write our code. So I'm going to do something that is a little lazy because instead of using variables to store everything, I'm just going to say for each. And in here, I use explode as my function call and use the return value right away inside of for each. And then inside explode, the first thing you specify is the delimiter. In this case, it is just a comma. And then the second thing that we need to specify is the string that actually contains the comma. So we can say ABC, comma, 1, 2, 3, comma, some kind of gibberish, comma, some more gibberish, okay? And double quote to end the entire thing. And that parenthesis related to explode, and then as item. Okay, so this is our loop. And what we'll do is inside the loop, all we're going to do is to print item itself. So I'm going to print item for the line feed. So this program is not going to generate an HTML document. Instead, it is just going to generate some output on the command line so that it's as minimal as possible. Okay, save the file. And then we run PHP explode. It doesn't take any parameters. There's no need to use PHP-CGI to run it. And it does look like it's working correctly because it prints ABC 1, 2, 3, and then the 2 lines of gibberish just like that. So what we can do next is to say, well, can we deal with nested explosion? So we have an explosion inside an explosion. Let's see how that might work. So we'll go ahead and go into the editor again. And this time we'll keep this one here, except we'll keep using the comma for the top level splitting. And then for the lower level splitting, we'll use something else. So for the top level splitting, we'll have tag/audio, comma, Carol/lever, David/Fox, and we'll add one more. Let me see. Iraj, there we go. Iraj subsidiary, sub. I cannot remember how to spell his last name. Subsidiary. I think that's close, but not exactly the same. Well, for this example, it doesn't really matter. Okay, we won't tell Iraj. I'm going to keep this item here just so that we know, what is the top level split. And then at the second level, we're going to say for each again. but this time we are exploding using a slash whatever item is, because each item has a slash to separate the first part from the second part. So that's the part, that's why it can be exploded again using the slash as a delimiter. And we'll say that each one of these things is called a subitem. Okay. And then we can say, what is the subitem? Subitem. And to make this look a little bit better, what we'll do is we'll do a little bit of indentation when we're printing the subitem. So I'm going to leave it like 4 spaces as indentation. So the output should look like tag Aoyang, tag/Aoyang, and then tag, and then Aoyang, and then carol/lever, and then carol, and then lever, and so on. Yeah. At least that's the idea. So let's check out how this is going to work out. Uh-oh, it's got a syntax error on line 5. So we go to line 5, and let's see. Oh, as. Okay. There we go. Oops. There we go. All right, so let's try that one more time. And you can see how it is extracting the top level stuff with a slash, and then it's using another explode to separate the sub items that has the slash as a delimiter. All right, so let's see what else we can do with this. If you want to, you can do a 3rd level split if you want to, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something that is related to your homework assignment. I'm going to do some counting here. So I'm going to put a counter here as 0, and I'll put a counter plus all the way into the inner loop. And we'll go ahead and print the counter right here. So we'll say counter, colon, and then the sub item. So this means the counter is going to count not only within the inner loop, but it will actually, it's a global counter that's counting everything that we are splitting. And somehow I think this is related to your homework assignment. Okay, so let's go ahead and check out what this program is going to do. So there we go. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, because these numbers are just incremented using the counter variable. All right. Let's see what we can do, what else we can do with this. Okay, so I'm going to do something like every 3 items are on the same line, and then the 4th item would be on the next line. So even though it might be breaking a particular person's name using a new line character. So let's try that. But to do that, I'm going to have to remove this print first, because otherwise it is going to interfere with what we are planning, what we're planning to do. And we also want to change this part just to print the sub item itself. And then we have to decide after this sub item, should we end with a comma so that we or space so that the next item is on the same line, or should we end it with a line feed character? So this line feed character has to go as well, because we want to have 3 things on the same line, and then the 4th thing will be on the next line. Okay, so we print this, and then what we need to do is to use counter to kind of let us know whether we should begin a next line or not. So we know that we have a conditional statement, if, and also there's an else, because there are 2 branches in this case. Should we use a space to separate this item from the next, or should we use a line feed so that we can open up the new line so that the next item will appear in the next on the next line? All right, so what is the determining factor? We know that counter is going from 0, 1, 2, and then we want to split to the next line, 3, 4, and 5, and so on. So what we need to do is to look at counter plus 1. So the 0 becomes a 1, the 1 becomes a 2, the 2 becomes a 3, And the 3 is what is letting us know that we need a line feed. So that means when counter plus 1 mod 3 is a 0, which means it is divisible by 3, then we have to use a line feed because we got 3 items on that line already. Otherwise, we use a space to separate items on the same line. So what this really should do is it should print 3 items on the line, go to the next line for the other 3 items, and so on. All right, so let's check it out. And it does work. So you can see how it is splitting Carol's name into 2 halves because Carol is the 3rd item on the first line and Lever is the 1st item on the 2nd line. Okay. Now, let's see whether we can make this even better in terms of making it do something that your homework assignment has to do. As you might notice, by the time we print the first and last name of Iraj, we're not quite at the end of that line yet. We need one more item. So the question now is, can we do we know how many more items we need on that line in order to finish it so that the program will end with the last line will always have 3 items. Okay, and how are we going to do that? That's the next question. So what we'll do is we are going to take a look at counter. Okay, so we have some kind of a loop here that is determined by the counter when we exit the loop. And inside, all we're going to do is to print, I'm going to put 5 underscore here and with a space in at the beginning. So the idea is it's going to fill up the last row of supposed to be 3 items with some blank stuff so that it still has the same count as all of the other lines. So now the question is, what do we put here as a condition? So when you think about this, you will think that, okay, if we have exactly 3 items already printed, then we don't have any need of a filler. And at that time, counter is going to be 3. So when counter is divisible by 3, there's nothing to do and we can just move forward. On the other hand, when we only have 2 items printed on the row, then counter would actually be 2 at this point, and then we have 1 blank to print in order to fill up that space. Okay, so given that is the case, maybe we can just say this portion, oh, okay, should be just counter mod 3. Okay, we know counter mod 3 is important. But the question is, what are we comparing it to in order to stay in the loop? We know that when counter mod 3 is 0, we don't need to get into here. So it's only when this is not 0 that we need to go in with this loop. And the other important part here is inside this loop, we have to kind of make sure that we increment counter 2, because otherwise it becomes an infinite loop and forever it will print space and then 4 underscores. This won't print the very last line feed character because there's no mechanism here to print the last line feed character. Well, not yet, but we'll test this first and see whether we can get this to work. So we have PHP, and that doesn't seem right to me because it prints check all your. Oh, okay, I put this into the wrong loop. Okay, get back here. This is where a really good editor really helps, because when I highlight this particular curly brace and I press square bracket close and end curly brace, it will go to the matching end of that particular curly brace. But you can also see that it highlights it on the screen right here, and that's pretty handy so that we can tell which loop we're ending. This is at the wrong place, so we'll take this out, put it outside of the main loop, because we want to print all the names first and then use the underscores to fill up whatever the last row contains. All right, we save it and then we run it. And this time, it's hard to see, but it is there. Let me put an empty line here. You can see how after Iraj's name, there are 4 underscores here, because that's exactly what we wanted to do. But you can also see that there's no line view character after this and before my name. So what we need to do is to change that logic. Because the convention is to have the separator printed when we print something. And in this case, we have the separator printed before we print something. So the idea here is to repeat this logic and just say that if counter +1 mod 3 is 0, then we'll print the line v character. So for that, we can just copy these 4 lines, 4 y, and put it here. And there we have it. Okay, so save the file, test it one more time. Aha, okay, so this time it looks pretty good because we have exactly 3 items on each line, and then the last line, even though we only had 2 items from Iraj's name, the logic correctly uses the underscores to fill in the 3rd item on the last line or on the last row. Cool. So it seems like we are done with this, but we are not, because anytime you use copy and paste, it is probably a good idea to think about, well, can we not use copy and paste? And what we did with copy and paste, let me turn on the line numbers. I copied line 9 to line 12 all the way to here, which is line 23 to line 26. That we actually need the space too, so this is actually not entirely correct, because if we give the algorithm something that ends up with a single item on the row, it would not do it correctly. It will not print the space between the items on the same row. So the correct way to do it is really to copy the entire conditional statement, including the else branch, which is printing that space. Okay, so this is correct, okay, with the space separating it. But this way, we also can tell that, hey, line 9 and line 23 are the same, line 10 and line 24 are the same. In other words, we got 2 blocks of code. One block of code is here, and the other block of code is here, and they are exactly the same. And also, we even have the counter ++ being the same too. So every time you have your code that has a kind of major section of copy and paste, you should turn it into a subroutine. So let's go ahead and turn this into a subroutine. Line 23 to line 31. Okay. So to turn something into a subroutine, just anywhere within your code section is fine. You just say function, give it a name, and I would call this print delimiter. Okay, and we'll do it the easy way first without using parameters. In other words, I'm not passing anything into the function, and so we want to copy line 12 up to line 20. Okay, so we go back here, and then we say line 12 to line 20, copy to here. So now we have that code inside the function. And once it is defined in a function, we don't need it to be here anymore. So we can now delete this section of code because it is now already in a function, and we just need to call the function. And the function is called print delimiter. Okay, there we go. Print delimiter, just like that. And we can do the same thing here. Get rid of the duplicate code. Oh, there we go. And then insert a call to print delimiter, like so. And before we do anything else, it's time to test the code again. Uh-oh, we got some problems. Undefined variable subitem. That's because, well, let's check out why it is complaining like that. And they're all on line 5. Okay. So when we get to line 5, oh, the print sub item should not be copied. So that one needs to be taken away because what we are printing depends on the situation. Okay. All right. But okay, so we'll leave the program the way it is right now. One thing that I might want to change this program. Okay, the program is working now. Let me just double check. Okay. Oh, it's still complaining. Now we have counter on line 4. Okay. That's because at this point, counter has not been counter. Everything that you refer to inside a subroutine are quote unquote local variables. So if you need to refer to something that is actually global, you need to declare that. So we need to say global counter to tell PHP that this counter variable is not supposed to be defined inside the subroutine, but it is defined outside of the subroutine as a global variable. So this will make the subroutine stop complaining about that. And it is printing everything like that, except it's printing everything on the same row. It's printing everything on the same row because this global counter is not maintained correctly. And that has to do with when I copied and pasted, I forgot to copy one line. I forgot to increment the counter. Okay, so counter equals counter plus 1, or you can just use counter plus plus here. Either way would work. Okay, and then we test it again. All right, so the code is back to what it used to do, even though now we're using a subroutine. All right, so if you need a break, this would be a good time to kind of pause the video or go back to watch it again in case you didn't catch some of the concepts. If you're ready, let's go ahead and continue to work on this program because I can use this to also illustrate how to use a function for various things. So the first thing we might notice is how many items on the row is 3, but we spell out 3 at multiple locations here. So when I look for the word 3, there's one here, there's also one here. And if I need to change the number of items per row, I need to change both locations in order for this logic to work. So that may not be a very attractive idea because if you do something like this, if you forget to change one of the positions, then the code won't work anymore. So what I want to do here is to use a variable. In this case, it's a global. And we just say number of columns. And we'll keep it as 3 at this time. So instead of using a 3 here, I can use num col. And instead of using a 3 here, I can also change this to num col. Okay. And the first thing we want to do is to make sure that I did not break the program. It's not going to work, I forgot one thing, because num col is a global variable. So we have to say global num col. There we go. And then we are ready to rerun the program. It is still doing what it used to do, which is correct. And we also want to double check and say, okay, if I want to change the number of columns to 4, is it really that easy to change it to 4 columns? So, and as it turns out, it is. What about 5? Let's try 5 here. Okay. And now it's 5. So it does work. I mean, it's by changing one single initialization, we can now change this code to work with almost any number of columns. So it would seem that we are all done, right? Well, I don't like global variables. Okay, the reason why global variables are not recommended has to do with when you look at the definition of a function, the use of global variables are not in the header part of a function. And also when you call a function, you're not passing those in. And as a result, when you um, when you look at the caller of a function, you don't know exactly which global variables may be affected. And in the long run, it makes a program more difficult to maintain. So that's usually it's not a good idea. On the other hand, you cannot just pass it as counter here, okay, because this is how you pass a parameter. So we have counter and num call, just like that. With these two passed as parameters, we don't need the globals anymore because now they are parameters, which also means every time we call the function, we have to supply those items. Okay? So we can use exactly the same name. There's no restriction that you cannot use the name of a global variable as the name of a parameter. Okay, so we can do it like that. Except there's one problem. The one problem has to do with parameters are by default passed by value. Now, that's a pretty important but also kind of difficult concept to explain. Passing by value means whatever you're passing here with this function call, okay, let me highlight it. So whenever you're passing something as a parameter, PHP is actually making a copy of that. So by the time we get to this counter, it is really a copy of the global variable counter. And that's not going to work because I need to change the counter here, and I need to change the original counter, not a copy of the original counter. So this code is not going to work. What we need to do is to put an ampersand here. That means, oops, there we go. Ampersand right in front of the dollar. That makes this, pass by reference, which basically means, PHP is passing where to find the original item into the subroutine instead of passing the value or copy of the parameter into the subroutine. Now, knowing where to find the original counter, whenever we refer to counter, one time is here and the other time it is here, it knows where to find the original counter. Okay, and if you don't want this program to be confusing because we're using counter and num call throughout this code, you can change the names of the parameters. In other words, you can change this one to C and change this one to N, and we just have to change all of these consistently, and everything should behave the same way as before. There we go. So I think this is a little bit better. Oh, C++, that is funny. All right. So let's see whether this program works or not. Okay, go back, check it out. Yeah, it is still working. So we're improving this program in terms of the structure of the code, even though it's still doing exactly the same thing as before, but the code is now more what we call modular. And if you want to, you can even specify the delimiter for a new line and the delimiter for things on the same line. So we can say this one can be new row delimiter, and the next one can be same row delimiter. Now, by passing these two in, then I no longer hard coding to use a line feed character for a new row delimiter, because now I can just say new row delimiter here. And also I can now change this one to same row delimiter. Okay, cool. So let's check out this code. Now, the other thing that we also have to change is whenever you add new parameters to a function, that every function call like this one needs to be changed to accommodate the addition of new parameters. So the easy way to get around this is to have these parameters initialized, which means what we do is we specify if the caller doesn't specify what this is supposed to be, we'll just use a new line as the new row delimiter. And if the caller does not specify, then we'll use, oops, right here, we'll use a space as the same row delimiter in this case. So this way, we don't have to change the way we call the subroutines. because the last two parameters are have default values. Okay, so let's check this code. Are we still printing the same thing? Yes. Okay, so that's really kind of cool because what you can do now is to kind of modify this logic so that so that you can pass something, like a bart, tag or something like that for new row delimiter, and then you can also use the close of a TD and the beginning of a TD tag as same row delimiter in order to print out stuff on the same row. So we're almost done with one thing that I think we can still improve, which is we're always printing something before we print the delimiter. Okay, same here and same here. So what we can do now is we can specify what we are printing and put that code here. Okay, so we are moving item into here, adding one more parameter. And also, we just need to have print item right here. By doing that, we have to make some changes to the original code by removing this particular print statement. And at the same time, specify it as a parameter when we call the subroutine. Okay, so this one. And for this one, the item to be printed is actually just a string of 4 underscores. 1, 2, 3, 4. There you go. Okay. And then we can comment out this guy here. There we go. So we have just parameterized, one more thing, which is changing, which is making the item to be printed also a parameter. So the program is truly, getting smaller and smaller because now we don't need these prints here because we moved all of those into here. So we'll save the file and then we'll run it again. And you can see the code is still doing what it's supposed to do, which is good. What else can we improve in this program? What we can also do with this particular program, well, for the first thing is print delimiter is no longer the proper name. Okay, so we can say, change print delimiter to print table item. Okay. And since I'm using VI, I can specify a range of lines where print delimiter is changed to print table item. Okay, and it changes all the references. It changes all the occurrences of print delimiter to print table item. And that should not affect the behavior of the program. The program still works exactly the same way as before. Okay. Let's see. So I think we're pretty close to getting this code to work with your homework assignment. So let me just explain again the key concept here. The key concept, the first one, is we use a global variable to keep track of the number of columns on the same row. Okay? So this is number of columns on a row. We use a subroutine to print a particular item in the table. But to do that, the first thing I do is to print the item itself. You're free to change this code in order to make it work with your homework assignment, but the idea is just printing the item first. But if you want to specify a tag that goes before the item, you can specify one more parameter here to specify the tag surrounding an item. This logic here is to determine, are we at the end of a row? Okay, so are we at the end of one row? And that is determined by how many items we're supposed to see on the row. If so, then we use new row delimiter. If not, we use same row delimiter to end that particular item. And we also have to remember to increment C which is a counter to track a number of items printed in a table. There we go. And C, once again, is passed by reference because of the ampersand in front of it. Okay. So that means, when we get to the actual subroutine, we just have to keep calling print table item, and it automatically keeps track of everything. Okay. So we save it, and let's PHP one more time. It is still working, in the correct way. I'm going to test it just one more time before I stop this video. I know this is running on and on and on, and it's a little bit long, but I do want to do this. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items specified here. So what if the number of items on the row is 9? Okay, we'll handle this case correctly. Well, the quick way to find out is to run the code, and it does it correctly. So it does work even if everything fits on a single row, which is great. Okay, so I'm going to end the video recording right now because I think this is kind of long and there's a lot of material to absorb here. If you have any questions about the concepts that I have talked about in this particular video, please let me know, and I will make some follow-up videos to explain those particular items. I'm suspecting passing by reference is one of those things, and possibly some other things related to subroutines. All right, so I'm going to stop it here, and I look forward to receiving your message about questions to clarify this program. And I will post the source code of this program too. So if you want to get a copy of this, you can change it, you can use it as is.